Hey there, my name is Daniel Drake, and I am the creator of Anthromancer, the multimedia game suite that includes the card game Mercenarium. And in this video, I'm going to teach you how to play Mercenarium. The very first thing you're going to do is you're going to separate the deck into two piles. 15 of the cards in the Anthromancer deck have blue backs. These are called hymns, and we'll get to those. And then the rest of the cards have black backs, and we will call them just deck cards or black cards. You're going to be taking cards from this deck, putting them onto the board in one way or another, and then moving them around in such a way that they are adjacent to each other, and then whoever has more dots can capture the other card. Now, this deck is more or less based on a traditional deck of playing cards. So if you're familiar with a deck of playing cards, this will seem pretty familiar as well. Instead of the diamonds, hearts, clubs, and spades, this deck has the claws, souls, gears, and blades. There are face values from 2 to 10, and then jacks, queens, kings, and aces. And then each suit in this deck has a lord. And we also have a set of dice, 2 6-sided dice and 1 12-sided die. The main objective of the game is to be the first to 5 captures. The secondary objective is to eliminate your opponent's board state, get rid of all their cards, and then occupy their house. If you can do either of those two things, you win the game of Mercenarium. At the start of the game, the first thing that you're going to do is you're going to shuffle and deal. If it's just a 2-player game, then it's customary to sit across the board from each other. Where a player sits at the board is going to determine the orientation of their cards during gameplay. There are 4 of these little black stars on the board, and these are called houses. And each player will be in control of one of those houses. And all of the cards that they control will have their black orientation line aligned with the house that they control. So if this 4 of gears was mine, then I would play it like that, where that black orientation line is parallel with my edge of the board. Each player will get 5 black cards and 1 blue card. Cool. Once players all have their hands, then you and your opponents will take turns rolling these 6-sided dice to see who goes first. Now, the special symbols on the 6-sided dice count as 6s when it comes to establishing turn order, so that's an 11. So when you get your hand, you establish turn order, and the game begins. Players are going to take turns performing 1 action per turn. Now, there's a list on this handy-dandy quick reference card. Summon a card, move a card, capture enemy card, buy a mercenary, sing a hymn, learn a hymn, draw a card. At the beginning of the game, chances are good that you're going to start by summoning a card. Now, that's just the term we use for taking a black card from your hand and putting it onto the board. Your house is kind of like your free space. When you summon a card in your house, it can be any suit, any face value, any card in your hand. You can just be like, boop, there we go. I've summoned a card. My turn will pass. It'll go to the next player. Once you have a card on the board, you can summon into empty spaces directly adjacent to it. That's like here, here, or here. As long as the card that I bring in is either the same suit or within 1 face value. It's kind of like Uno logic. Lords, you'll notice, have no dots. They're naked. You'll also notice that lords are not in the traditional poker sequence. So what does that mean for summoning them? Well, for the purposes of summoning lords, they are considered wild. So if I have a card on the board, I can put a lord directly adjacent to it. Now, once it's on the board, it's no longer wild. It can only bring in other lords, because they are also wild, and cards that share a suit with this lord. Now, once you have a card on the board, you then have the option of moving a card as your turn action. Movement is very simple, and it's easy to remember. If the card is on the board, it can be moved 1 space forwards, backwards, left, or right. So if I'm in control of this 8, I can move it here, or I can move it here, or I can move it here. If I choose to move it forward on my next turn, I can move it back. Now, the next turn action is capturing. Capturing is all about the dots on the edges of the cards. Now, with these 2 cards here, we have an 8 of gears and an 8 of blades. If they meet head on like this, my opponent's 8 has 3 dots where my 8 only has 2. And that means that their card, their 8, is threatening mine. If it was their turn, they could move into the space and capture the card. When you make a capture, you put it along your edge of the board face up. And when you fill that edge of the board with captures, that's when you win the game. If I'm smart, I will have taken a couple of turns to navigate this card around to be on the flank of this 8 of gears where I have the dot advantage. Now, there's a lot of situations where you'll have something like this. Let's say that this player, that somebody sitting over here, was playing the game with us. In this arrangement, we are actually tied. We have the same number of dots. So what happens? You'll see here that gears threatens blades in ties. So here, this 8 of gears is threatening this 8 of blades, even though they are tied. If we have something like this, where the 6 of souls and this 8 of blades are against each other, if either player chooses to, they can both go to the discard pile. We call that annihilation. I might be tempted to just annihilate the 6 of souls to deprive my opponent of getting a capture. If there's a tie between cards of the same suit, they do what's called blocking. They can't interact with each other. And before we move on, so lords fight with their suit. Here we have a Lord of Blades in the center space belonging to me, and then we have one card of each suit belonging to my opponent. So on this board, these cards can't interact because they are the same suit. This Lord is threatening this 6 because blades threaten claws. These two cards can annihilate each other and send both cards to the discard pile. And finally, even though this 4 of gears has no dots on that edge, it is threatening the Lord of Blades because gears threaten blades. Lords fight with their suit. So lords summon wild, and then they fight with their suit. The next turn action after capturing is buy a mercenary. Now, this is the name of the game, Mercenarium. Once you've made a capture, it works as a kind of currency. You can spend your captures to buy enemy mercenaries. Mercenaries are jacks, queens, kings, and aces. If it's my turn and the board looks like this, if I want to, I can stop this real quick by simply flipping that face down. That still counts towards 5. If I can get 5 captures, I'm not discarding this capture. Any jack, queen, king, or ace on the board, I can then pivot and gain control of. I have bought that mercenary. There is one limitation to buying a mercenary. We call this rule contracts. A mercenary is considered under contract for a full round after you have summoned a mercenary or after you have bought a mercenary. So the next turn action is, it says sing a hymn. You don't actually have to sing anything. It's lore, it's whatever. The hymns, these 15 special cards that all have Roman numerals and titles, break the rules in really specific ways. When you use it, it will take effect. And most of the text on this quick reference card is devoted to those hymns. For instance, I was dealt Visionaire. Choose one of your in-play cards and move it to any open space excluding houses. And then it says page 82. Page 82. Everything I need to know about Visionaire. It has a neat diagram of how it should actually look in play, an expanded definition, and then there's also some like explanations of meanings and lore, but that's not what you're here for. Now, you can only hold one of these at a time. Usually when you sing a hymn, it will go to the discard pile. Once you've used it, you might want to get another one, or you might find that the hymn you have is not actually useful in your situation. That's the next turn action, learn a hymn. And there's a little blue asterisk on the quick reference card that indicates this column here. It says to learn a hymn, make one offering. And what you're doing is you're discarding cards from your hand or spending captures in order to pay for a new one. So the acceptable offerings, it says 2 through 9 cards, or if you have a card that is 10 or higher, or 1 capture spend. If I have an unspent capture, I'm allowed to flip that capture and learn a new hymn. And finally, if you have a hymn in your hand that you don't want, that isn't serving you, you can get rid of it and any one other card, regardless of its value. Or you can get rid of it and spend a capture to learn a new hymn. So there's technically 4 different offerings you can make to learn a new hymn. And once you've made one, you draw that hymn, and on your next turn, you can use it. And finally, the last turn action before you can get into the game and start playing is draw a card. You can just draw from the main deck. The only limitation here is that you cannot hold more than 5 black cards at a time. If you have 5 black cards and they all suck, you just have to discard one of those cards first. We call it ditching the dirt. There is one other thing. Whenever either the deck or the hymnal runs out of cards, at that point, the game enters what we call singularity. Singularity is sort of like a sudden death mode. And the idea is that you take all of the remaining cards in the deck, all of the cards in the discard pile, and you shuffle them together. The hymns are mixed into the main deck. Now, at the end of every turn, each player draws a card. There's no longer any maximum hand size. You can have as many black and blue cards in your hand as you like. There's also no cost for drawing hymns, but you can't just draw one. You have to wait for it to come up in rotation and draw it from the deck. If we entered Singularity, and I was the one that triggered it, I'm going to be the one who draws a card at the end of my turn first. And look at that, I get a hymn. If during Singularity a player uses their turn action to draw a card, they will still draw a card at the end of their turn in addition. If the Singularity deck runs out of cards, victory goes to the player with the most unspent captures. Even if your opponent has captured 4 cards, if they've spent all 4 of them, I can still win with 1 capture. I can come from behind and win the game because I didn't spend my capture. In the event that you have the same number of captures face up and face down, we actually look at the value of the face-up captures, and whoever has the single highest value card wins the game. To figure out the value of an individual card, it goes by face value and then by suit. 2 through 10, Jack, Queen, King, Ace, and then Lords. And then above those, there are a couple of hymns that can be captured. The Fool, Seasons, Druid, Zodiac, the Fox. They are valued in that order. So the Fox is the highest value card in the entire game. That's everything. That's the whole game. That's all the nooks and crannies. Once you get into it and start playing, strategies start to emerge and you start to understand the patterns of the cards. If you happen to get really good, we would love to have you participate in one of our official tournaments. If you like this game, and if you want to see more Anthromancer stuff, I would love it if you would check out and back Anthromancer on Patreon. You can find us streaming on Twitch, and you can listen to all of our music on your streaming platform of choice. Thanks so much for watching, and until next time, see for yourself.